Admiral Vera Kane stood before the towering crystalline structure that served as the Galactic Council's tribunal chamber, her weathered hands clasped behind her back as she watched the holographic display flicker to life. The image showed new Sydney in its final moments, residential towers collapsing like dominoes, their steel and glass frames buckling under the weight of orbital bombardment. Children's screams echoed through the chamber's perfect acoustics, a sound that would haunt her nightmares for years to come. Exhibit 47 Alpha, announced Counselor Vorth, his six-eyed amphibian face betraying no emotion as he gestured toward the carnage, the unfortunate civilian casualties resulting from humanity's violation of Section 12.7 of the Terran Accords. Kane's jaw tightened. Unfortunate casualties. 23 million souls reduced to a bureaucratic euphemism. The Coluvian delegation sat in their elevated pods, their chitinous forms gleaming under the chamber's artificial light. Ambassador Crexford clicked his mandibles in what passed for satisfaction among his kind. The humans were warned, he said, his translator rendering his clicks into cold, mechanical words. The mining rights to the Kepler 440, the system, were clearly outlined in Article 15 of the treaty. Their establishment of agricultural colonies on Kepler 4 to be constituted a direct violation. Agricultural colonies, Kane repeated, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. Families trying to grow food for their children. Irrelevant. Crexford replied, the treaty was clear. The system belonged to the Coluvian hegemony for mineral extraction. Your species chose to violate that agreement. Counselor Vorth's bulbous eyes swiveled toward Kane. Admiral, the Galactic Council finds that while the Coluvian response was excessive, the initial treaty violation was committed by humanity. The deaths at New Sydney, tragic as they are, fall within the bounds of justified retaliation under Galactic Law for 5B. The words hung in the chamber like poison gas. Kane felt something cold settle in her stomach, a glacial calm that she recognized from her days commanding destroyer squadrons in the Outer Rim conflicts. It was the feeling that came just before she ordered weapons free. Justified, she said. Softly, you call the incineration of children justified. The law is clear, Admiral. Vorth continued, however, the Council is prepared to offer a compromise. Humanity will withdraw from all disputed systems, pay reparations of 500 billion credits to the Coluvian hegemony, and submit to mining oversight for the next 50 standard years. In return, the Coluvians will agree to a cessation of hostilities. Crexford's mandibles clicked again, this time in what might have been amusement. Your species should be grateful for our mercy, human. We could have sterilized all of your colonies. Kane looked around the chamber at the faces of the assembled delegates. The reptilian saurians with their cold, calculating stares. The ethereal Valens floating in their containment fields, utterly indifferent to mortal suffering. The slug-like Gorthans, who had built their empire on the bones of lesser species. All of them nodding in agreement, all of them complicit in legitimizing genocide. Admiral, Vorth pressed, do you accept these terms on behalf of the Terran Federation? For a long moment, Kane said nothing. She thought of the children in New Sydney, playing in parks that no longer existed. She thought of the farmers on Kepler 4b, whose only crime had been trying to feed their families. She thought of the treaty they had signed in good faith, believing that civilization meant something more than raw power wrapped in legal jargon. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of humanity's fury distilled into 3 simple words. Counteroffer, she said. No. The chamber erupted in startled clicks, hisses, and electronic squeals. Crexford reared back on his hind legs, mandibles spread wide in threat display. You dare reject the Council's mercy? Kane turned to face him directly, and something in her eyes made the massive insectoid take an involuntary step backward. Ambassador, you seem to be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about my species. You think we're just another client race, desperate for the Council's approval. You think fear will make us compliant. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. You're about to learn why Earth has a saying, speak softly and carry a big stick. We tried speaking softly. That didn't work out so well for New Sydney. The Coluvian task force emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima Centauri system. Like harbingers of extinction, 12 dreadnoughts, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with bioluminescent weapon arrays, flanked by 36 cruisers and over 100 escort vessels. Admiral Crex Dye, brother to the ambassador, commanded from the bridge of the chitinous retribution, his compound eyes fixed on the tactical display showing humanity's pathetic defenses. Pitiful, He clicked to his bridge crew. 3 orbital defense platforms and a handful of destroyers. The humans have learned nothing from New Sydney, Commander HFY, his mandibles still dripping with the ceremonial scarification oil that marked recent promotion, studied the sensor readings with growing unease. Admiral, the energy signatures from those platforms are unusual. They don't match any known human weapon systems. HFY's attention remained focused on the approaching planet, where 6 billion humans awaited their fate. Irrelevant. Open communication channels to the colony. The view screen flickered, revealing the face of Colonial Governor Hendrix Montague, a grizzled man whose weathered features spoke of decades on frontier worlds. Behind him, evacuation sirens wailed through the corridors of Proxima Station. Governor Montague, HFY announced, his translator rendering his clicks into perfectly enunciated standard. By order of the Galactic Council and in accordance with Terran Accord Section 19, this system is now under Coluvian administration. You have 30 minutes to begin evacuation procedures before we commence orbital bombardment. Montag's response was immediate and unprintable. HFY's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Your bravado is admirable, but futile. Human, observe the futility of resistance. The Coluvian admiral gestured to his weapons officer. Target the first defense platform. Show them the price of defiance. The chitinous retribution's primary biocannon swiveled toward platform Alpha, its organic barrel dilating as bioplasma began to build within its chambered depths. The weapon that had reduced mountains to glass on 17 worlds charged to full power. The platform's response was swift and merciless. What emerged from the human structure wasn't the expected particle beam or kinetic projectile. Instead, a lance of coherent antimatter tore through space at 97% light speed, punching through the dreadnought shields as if they were tissue paper. The beam carved through 30 meters of biomechanical armor, vaporized the forward weapon rays, and detonated the ship's primary plasma conduits. The chitinous retribution died in a cascade of explosions that painted space in brilliant orange. Fire? Impossible! HFY shrieked from the backup command center aboard the cruiser Mandible's Edge. Antimatter weapons are restricted technology. The humans don't have antimatter weapons. They do now, came a new voice over the communication channel. Admiral Vera Kane's face replaced Governor Montag's on the screen, her expression carved from glacial stone. Did you really think we'd sit idle after New Sydney? That we wouldn't prepare for your inevitable return? The second platform. Fired. It's a antimatter lance bisecting the escort vessels in a single shot. Their hulls split like overripe fruit, spilling atmosphere and crew into the void. HFY's mandibles chattered in panic. All ships, evasive maneuvers, return fire. The Coluvian fleet responded with everything they had. Bioplasma cannons, organic missiles, spore torpedoes that could eat through hull plating, all of it concentrated on the 3 human platforms. The space around Proxima Station became a light show of destruction. As weapons fired cross-paths in deadly ballet, Platform Beta took a direct hit from a concentrated bioplasma barrage, its antimatter containment fields flickering under the assault. For a moment, it seemed the Coluvians might break through. Then the platform's secondary systems engaged, and its damaged sections were jettisoned into space while backup weapons came online. Redundant systems, Kane explained conversationally. As if discussing the weather, we learned that from studying the wreckage of our colonies. Turns out, when someone murders your civilians, it really motivates your engineers. The third platform fired. It's a antimatter beam catching a Coluvian cruiser amidships. The ship folded in on itself like crumpled paper before exploding in a brief, brilliant star. HFY made a decision that would haunt his remaining life. All ships, concentrate fire on the planet. If we cannot defeat their defenses, we'll destroy what they're defending. The surviving Coluvian vessels turned their weapons toward Proxima Centauri B, their biocannons charging for the kind of bombardment that had reduced New Sydney to ash. In memory, they never got the chance to fire. The human destroyers that had been lurking at the system's edge suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds, their engines burning with signatures that made no sense according to known physics. They closed the distance to the Coluvian fleet in minutes instead of hours, their hulls glowing with barely contained energy. What in the void? HFY began. The first destroyer, TFNS Retribution, rammed directly into the cruiser poison spines. At 20% light speed, the impact vaporized both ships instantly, creating a miniature star that bathed the system in deadly radiation. The second destroyer, TFNS Justice, targeted the dreadnought Swarm Queen. Its captain, Lucia Voss, opened a channel as her ship accelerated to ramming speed. For New Sydney, you bastards. The collision sent shockwaves through the Coluvian formation, crippling to more vessels and sending debris spinning through space like deadly confetti. When the light faded, half the Coluvian task force was gone. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Delegates from 37 species filled the crystalline chamber with a cacophony of clicks, roars, electronic squeals, and psychic emanations that made the translator raise smoke from overload. Counselor Vor's 6 eyes darted frantically between the assembled representatives as he pounded his ceremonial gavel a chunk of compressed dark matter that could level city blocks. Order, order. The amphibian's throat sac inflated to maximum size as his voice boomed through the chamber. The emergency protocols are now in effect. On the central holographic display, tactical data from the Proxima Centauri massacre painted a picture that defied every assumption the galaxy had made about human capabilities, antimatter weapons, relativistic ramming attacks, energy signatures that violated 3 different laws of physics. Ambassador Crexford stood in his delegation pod, his exoskeleton bearing fresh scarification marks of mourning. Honored counselors, the humans have committed an act of unprecedented barbarism. They destroyed a lawful enforcement fleet with forbidden weapons technology. The Saurian delegate, Seth Carr, flicked his forked tongue in agitation. The data indicates these forbidden weapons were manufactured using elements not found in their home system. How did they acquire restricted materials? Does it matter? Screeched the Valen representative, her ethereal form flickering with barely contained outrage. They have violated 17 separate accords governing weapons of mass destruction. The punishment is clear total sterilization. A low, harmonic vibration filled the chamber as the cetacean ambassador activated his translation matrix. Leviathan Primes, song translated as cold, measured words. The humans obtained a antimatter from the Kepler system they allegedly violated. They strip mined the gas giant for helium-3 and established particle accelerators in the asteroid belt. Our oversight was inadequate. Counselor Vor's stock swiveled toward the Coluvian delegation. You assured us their industrial capacity was primitive. Your intelligence was catastrophically wrong. Crexford's mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment among his species. Our assessment was based on their declared colonial infrastructure. We did not anticipate covert military industrialization. Covert? The word came from the chamber's entrance, where Admiral Vera Kane strode through the energy barrier that should have prevented any unauthorized entry. Her escort of 12 humans in powered armor took positions around the chamber perimeter, their weapons trained on the delegate pods. The chamber erupted in alarm calls and defensive displays. Vor's throat sac deflated to a terrified whisper. Admiral, your presence here violates, everything violates something in your Byzantine legal system. Kane interrupted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. But since you've already declared us criminals, we thought we'd act the part. She gestured toward the holographic display, which now showed real-time footage from human colonies across the outer rim. Massive construction yards hung in space around gas giants, their assembly lines churning out sleek vessels that bore no resemblance to previous human designs. Antimatter production facilities the size of small moons pulsed with barely contained energy. Covert, King repeated, we've been building this fleet in open space for 3 years. Your surveillance was just too arrogant to notice a primitive species preparing for war. Crexford reared up on his hind legs, mandibles spread in full threat display. You dare threaten the Galactic Council itself? I'm not threatening anyone, King replied with deadly calm. I'm delivering an ultimatum. You have 72 hours to withdraw all Coluvian forces from human space, pay reparations for New Sydney, and submit to war crimes tribunals for the murder of civilians. The laughter that erupted from the Coluvian delegation sounded like breaking glass. Ridiculous. Humans number barely 8 billion across all your colonies. The Coluvian hegemony commands fleets that could blot out your sun. Numbers, Kane said, have a way of becoming irrelevant when your enemy stops playing by your rules. The display shifted again, showing the edge of Coluvian space where something impossible was taking shape. A structure the size of a small moon, its surface bristling with weapon arrays that made the Proxima platforms look like toys. At its heart, a massive ring that pulsed with energies that registered off every known scale. Impossible, whispered the Valen delegate. That energy signature, it's stellar class. Stellar class antimatter projector, King confirmed. capable of destabilizing a star's fusion processes from a distance of 12 light-years. We call it the New Sydney Memorial. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of several delegates. Breathing apparatus struggling to cope with shock, Councillor Vorth found his voice first. You would commit genocide on that scale. You already did, King replied. You just did it retail instead of wholesale. She turned to face the Coluvian delegation directly. Your choice, Ambassador. Withdraw and pay reparations, or find out what happens when humans decide that mutually assured destruction isn't mutual enough. Crexfer's mandibles clicked in a pattern that his translator couldn't render into standard, a sound that conveyed contempt, fury, and the absolute certainty of his species' superiority. Bluff. Your species lacks the resolve for true warfare. You are soft creatures who weep over the deaths of strangers. You're right, Kane said. We do weep over the deaths of strangers. We weep, and then we make sure their deaths are avenged. She activated her personal communicator. Admiral Torres, this is Kane. Execute Operation Lazarus. On the display, the massive weapon platform began to rotate, its targeting array swiveling toward the Coluvian home system. Energy readings spiked as a time adder began building in the projection chamber. 71 hours and 58 minutes, Kane announced. I suggest you use them wisely. As she turned to leave, Councillor Vorth called out desperately, Admiral, there must be another way. The galaxy has lived in peace for peace. Kane stopped at the chamber's threshold. You call what happened to New Sydney peace? You call legitimizing genocide peace? Her laugh was harsh as winter wind. Counselor, you're about to learn the difference between peace and the temporary absence of war. The chamber doors sealed behind her, leaving the galactic powers to contemplate the kind of enemy they had created through their callous indifference to human suffering. Outside the council chambers, war was already beginning. The Coluvian War, fleet assembled at the edge of their home system, was a sight that had broken the will of dozens of species across the galaxy's recorded history. 800 vessels strong, including a legendary hive ship Eternal Swarm of biomechanical Leviathan the size of Manhattan, that served as both mobile fortress and spawning ground for the hegemony. As warrior castes, Admiral Crexdi, promoted after his brother's diplomatic failure, stood in the command nexus of the great ship, his compound eyes reflecting the bioluminescent displays that showed human fleet movements. Around him, hundreds of lesser commanders clicked and chittered reports in the rapid-fire combat dialect of their species. The humans have divided their forces, reported Battle Commander Vexnal, his scarred carapace bearing the marks of 17 different campaigns. Their main fleet holds position at the Kepler system, but smaller squadrons have appeared throughout our outer territories. Crexdi studied the tactical display with growing satisfaction. The humans had perhaps 200 ships, sleek, angular vessels that look fast but fragile compared to Coluvian bioships. They seek to divide our attention with harassment tactics, a desperate strategy from a desperate species. Admiral, interrupted Intelligence Skazjekskri, her neural implants flickering with the incoming data streams. We're receiving reports of attacks on isolated outposts. The humans are targeting civilian populations. The bridge fell silent except for the organic humming of the ship's living systems. In Coluvian culture, attacking non-combatants was not merely taboo, it was incomprehensible. Their warrior philosophy was built on the concept of honorable combat between military forces. Show me, Crexdi commanded. The main display shifted. The footage from the mining colony of Kethvar, a facility built into the asteroid belt of a dead system. What they saw defied every assumption about human military doctrine. The human ships didn't announce themselves. They didn't demand surrender. They simply materialized from hyperspace and opened fire with the time adder weapons, vaporizing the colony's defensive platforms in seconds. When the evacuation transports launched, filled with worker-caste civilians and their larvae, the humans targeted them with the same ruthless efficiency. No survivors, no prisoners, no mercy. Impossible, Crexdi whispered. Humans are supposed to be soft, emotional. They spare non-combatants. Not anymore, came a voice from the communication array. Admiral Kane's face appeared on the screen, her expression carved from Arctic stone. You taught us a valuable lesson at New Sydney, Admiral. You showed us that the galaxy respects only strength and fears only the willingness to use it. Crexdi's mandibles spread in fury. You have violated every law of civilized warfare. Civilized? Kane's laugh was sharp as breaking ice. You turned families into ash and called it law enforcement. Now you're upset that we've learned from your example. The display split, showing real-time feeds from across Coluvian space. Human squadrons struck like viral infections, appearing without warning to sterilize entire installations. The mining complex at Thrix Prime gone, the supply depot at Varnexus vaporized, the communication relay at Keth Madras reduced to expanding debris clouds. But the worst was yet to come. Admiral, Jexpri's voice was barely a whisper. The humans have targeted the nursery worlds. On the screen, the agri-world of Calith Newell burned, its vast spawning pools, where millions of Coluvian larvae developed in carefully maintained biospheres, boiled under a time-matter bombardment. The death screams of an entire generation echoed across subspace frequencies. Monsters. Vexnal snarled, his weapon arms extending involuntarily. They kill our young. Like you killed ours, Kane replied calmly. The children of New Sydney were playing in their schools when your bioplasma turned them to vapor. Did you think we'd forgotten? Did you think we'd forgive? Krextai found his voice through a haze of species deep horror. This is not warfare. This is extinction. Finally, Kane said, you understand the stakes. But you're wrong about one thing. This is warfare. It's total warfare. Fought by the rules you established when you legitimized the murder of civilians. Her image leaned forward, and Krextai saw something in her eyes that made his exoskeleton reflexively seal against vacuum. You wanted to teach humanity about power, Admiral. Consider this your first lesson in human escalation doctrine. The transmission cut, leaving the Coluvian command staff in stunned silence. Orders. Admiral, Vexnal asked finally. Krextai stared at the tactical display, watching as red icons human attack squadrons multiplied across Coluvian space. Like a virulent plague, each icon represented another colony burning, another generation of his people dying. Signal the fleet, he said, his voice hollow. Emergency hyperspace to the Kepler system. We end this now, before they destroy us all. The Eternal Swarm and her escort fleet tore through hyperspace at maximum burn, their biomechanical hulls straining against forces that would have crushed conventional vessels. Behind them, the Coluvian hegemony burned as human vengeance methodically erased 3 centuries of expansion. And conquest. When they emerged at Kepler 442, they found the human fleet waiting. 200 ships arranged in a perfect sphere around the system's star, their hulls gleaming like silver daggers against the cosmic dark. At their center sat something that shouldn't exist, a space station the size of a small planet, its surface bristling with weapons that made a time matter look primitive, impossible. Krextai breathed. They couldn't have built that in 3 years. Admiral, Jexpri's voice was barely audible. Those energy readings, that's not a space station. That's a ship. The massive vessel, if it could be called a vessel, began to rotate slowly, bringing its primary weapon array to bear on the Coluvian fleet. Power readings spiked beyond measurement, as something at its core began building toward firing configuration. A new voice filled the bridge, transmitted on all frequencies simultaneously. It belonged to Captain Marcus Stellarwind, commander of humanity's ultimate weapon, Coluvian fleet. You are surrounded and outgunned. Surrender now, and your crews will be treated according to the laws of war that you yourselves drafted. Krextai looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers, warriors who had conquered star systems and brought entire species to heel. Now they watched their sensor displays with the wide-eyed terror of larvae, seeing their first predator. Never, he replied, though his voice cracked with species deep fear. The Coluvian hegemony does not surrender to inferior races. So be it, Stellarwind replied. Fire at will. The battle for Kepler 442 was about to begin, and with it, the final test of whether the galaxy's old order could survive humanity's new rules of war. The first salvo from the human megaship TFNS extinction event split space itself. The weapon wasn't a time matter, it was something worse. A focused gravity lance that compressed space-time into a needle-thin beam of pure destruction. When it struck the Coluvian dreadnought spawning terror, the massive bioship didn't explode. It collapsed, its 3-kilometer length crushed into a sphere barely 10 meters wide before the gravitational stress finally tore it apart at the quantum level. All vessels, attack formation Mandible 7, Admiral Krextai screamed across the command frequencies as his fleet scattered like startled insects. Concentrate fire on their heavy units. The Coluvian response was immediate and overwhelming. 800 bioships opened fire simultaneously, their organic weapons painting space in brilliant displays of destruction. Bioplasma cannons that could melt asteroids converged on human destroyers. while swarm missiles living creatures bred for suicide attack swarmed toward the enemy formations in their billions. The human destroyer TFNS Righteous Fury took a direct hit from a bioplasma lance that would have vaporized a mountain. Its hull, composed of metamaterials that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, absorbed the energy and channeled it into its own weapon systems. The ship's return fire was a beam of pure conversion energy that turned matter directly into light. The cruiser poised and nest became a brief, brilliant nova. Impossible. Battle Commander Vexnal shrieked as his sensors registered the readings. Their ships are violating conservation of energy. Physics, Admiral Kane's voice echoed across all frequencies, is apparently more flexible than your treaties. Captain Reyes, execute pattern Omega. The human fleet suddenly shifted formation, their ships moving in perfect synchronization despite the chaos of battle. They formed a three-dimensional helix around the Coluvian forces, their weapons firing in a calculated sequence that turned space into a geometric pattern of destruction. The Coluvian heavy cruiser Mandible of Wrath found itself caught in a crossfire between 6 human vessels. Its bioarmor, evolved to deflect energy weapons, meant nothing against humanity's new arsenal. A quantum disruptor beam unraveled its molecular structure at the subatomic level. The ship literally ceased to exist, its atoms scattered across local space like cosmic dust. But the Coluvians were not defenseless prey. The Eternal Swarm brought its primary weapon to bear, a biocannon the size of a city block that fired concentrated streams of weaponized bacteria capable of eating through any known material. The beam caught the human cruiser TFNS Vengeance amidships, and the ship's hull began dissolving as billions of engineered organisms consumed it from within. Captain Rodriguez, commanding Vengeance, made a decision that exemplified the new human way of war. All hands, abandon ship, set auto-destruct for maximum yield. The cruiser's crew evacuated in escape pods that immediately accelerated to near-light speed, using drives that should have liquefied their occupants. Vengeance itself plowed straight into the heart of the Coluvian formation, before detonating in an antimatter explosion that vaporized everything. Within a 1,000-kilometer radius, 12 Coluvian ships died in that single blast. Madness. Krextai watched in horror as more human vessels adopted kamikaze tactics, their crews evacuating moments before their ships became guided missiles. They sacrificed their most valuable assets without hesitation. Ships can be rebuilt. King Kane's cold reply, our children cannot be resurrected. The battle descended into a nightmare of mathematical precision and organic fury. Human weapons that bent physics to their will met Coluvian biotechnology that had evolved over millions of years. Space became a three-dimensional battlefield, where the laws of reality served as suggestions rather than absolutes. The Coluvian biofighter swarms millions of single-pilot organic craft that moved like skulls of predatory fish swarmed the human formations. Each fighter was a living weapon, its pilot's nervous system directly interfaced with the ship's biological functions. They moved within human coordination, striking weak points in human formations with surgical precision. The human response was typically brutal in its efficiency. Commander Sarah Nightfall, leading Fighter Squadron 7, activated her ship's new defensive system. The fighter's hull suddenly bloomed with thousands of microscopic weapons that fired streams of weaponized nanobots. Each shot was invisible to the naked eye, but when it struck a Coluvian biofighter, the enemy craft began dissolving from within as the nanobots consumed its organic components. In 30 seconds, Fighter Squadron 7 destroyed over 4,000 enemy craft. Nanotechnology, weapons, intelligence. Jexkri's voice cracked with despair. They're using Grey Goose scenarios as tactical weapons. But even as the human fighters carved through the Coluvian swarms, they paid a price. The biofighters that got through their defensive screens struck with weapons that turned human pilots into breeding grounds for alien parasites. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones had enough time to scream warnings to their comrades before the organisms burst from their bodies. At the battle center, the Eternal Swarm and the Extinction Event faced each other like titans from different realities. The Coluvian hive ship was a masterpiece of biological engineering, its living hull adapting to each human weapon that struck it. The human megaship was a testament to scientific achievement that bordered on the supernatural, its systems operating on principles that conventional physics couldn't explain. When their primary weapons finally met, the collision of forces created a tear in space-time itself. Captain Stellar Wind, commanding the Extinction Event, watched his ship's readings spike beyond measurement. As the gravity lance met the Eternal Swarm's bioplasma cannon, the two beams created a localized space-time distortion that bent light around it in impossible patterns. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, her voice steady despite the readings that should have been physically impossible. "The distortion is expanding. If it reaches critical mass, it'll take the entire system with it. Stellar wind finished." "Understood. All ships, emergency withdrawal to minimum safe distance." But Admiral HFY had reached the breaking point where logic surrendered to desperate fury. "No retreat. All ships, ramming speed. If we die, we take the humans with us." The surviving Coluvian vessels, barely 300 of the original 800, accelerated toward the human fleet with the single-minded determination of their species. Bioships that had served for centuries became guided missiles, their crews singing death songs that echoed across subspace. The human response was immediate and merciless. Every human ship opened fire simultaneously, their combined weapons creating a wall of destruction that no conventional fleet could have survived. But the Coluvians were beyond conventional tactics now. They were fighting for the survival of their species, and desperation gave them strength that numbers couldn't quantify. 6 to 7 Coluvian ships broke through the defensive fire and struck human vessels in suicide runs that lit up space like dying stars. The human losses were catastrophic. 40 ships destroyed in as many seconds, their crews vaporized before they could evacuate. But for every human ship that died, the Coluvians lost 10. When the slaughter finally ended, the space around Kepler 442 was a graveyard of twisted metal and organic fragments. Of the 800 Coluvian ships that had entered the system, fewer than 50 remained operational. The human fleet had been reduced to 130 vessels, but they still commanded the battlefield. Admiral HFY, his command ship, crippled and bleeding atmosphere, stared at the tactical display with the hollow eyes of a being who had witnessed the end of everything he believed in. "Signal the surviving vessels," he ordered, his voice barely a whisper. "Full retreat. Emergency hyperspace to the homeworld." As the battered Coluvian survivors fled into hyperspace, Admiral Kane stood on the bridge of her flagship, surveying the cost of humanity's revenge. Thousands of her people were dead, but the enemy had paid 10 times that price. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales for New Sydney, but it was a beginning. The Coluvian homeworld of Mantis Prime had never known the touch of foreign weapons. For 3,000 years, it had been the heart of an empire that spanned 17 star systems, its bioarchitectural cities rising from vast organic foundations that pulsed with the life rhythm of 40 billion inhabitants. Now, as Admiral HFY's battered fleet limped into orbit around their ancestral world, the planet's inhabitants looked up at skies filled with the debris of their once invincible armada. "Impossible." Supreme Hierarch Vorth King clicked from her throne organism in the Grand Hive, her ancient carapace gleaming with the bioluminescent implants that marked her rank. "The humans cannot have defeated our entire war fleet." General Krexzul, military commander of the Home Defense Forces, studied the tactical displays with growing horror. Of the 800 ships that had departed for Kepler 442, only 43 had returned. Most of those were barely spaceworthy, their bio-hulls scarred and bleeding the vital fluids that kept Coluvian vessels alive. "Hierarch," he reported, his mandibles clicking in the formal cadences of catastrophic news. "The survivors report weapons that violate known physics. The humans have somehow developed technology beyond our comprehension." "Technology," Vorth Kane spat, her throat sacs, inflating with contempt, "is merely the application of natural law. These humans are recent spawn, barely risen from their birth mud. They cannot have surpassed the wisdom of eons." Her words were interrupted by an alert that sent tremors through the Grand Hive's living walls. Every biosensor in the system screamed warnings as something emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Mantis Prime's gravity well. The human fleet had arrived, but this was not the battered force that had fought at Kepler 442. This was something new, something that made the previous human ships look like children's toys. 60 vessels, each one larger than a Coluvian dreadnought, their hulls writhing with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. At their center hung the TFNS Absolute Zero, a ship that defied every convention of military engineering. Where human vessels had been angular and functional, this monstrosity was organic in appearance, its hull flowing like liquid metal, while weapons that resembled flowers bloomed across its surface. But there was nothing natural about its construction. It was life perverted into an instrument of absolute destruction. Impossible. General Krexzul whispered. That ship. It reads as both artificial and alive. How can metal think? Admiral Kane's face appeared on every communication screen across the planet simultaneously. Her image burned into the retinas of every Coluvian citizen. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of speech as any judgment. People of Mantis Prime, she began, her voice carrying across the subspace frequencies with crystalline clarity. 3 months ago, your military forces murdered 23 million of my people. Your Galactic Council called it justified. Your leaders called it necessary. Your people celebrated it as victory on the surface of Mantis Prime. 40 billion Coluvians watched the sky as the human fleet arranged itself in perfect formation above their world. Children pressed against bio windows in their nursery spires while their parents clicked prayers to gods who had never faced weapons that could unmake reality itself. Today, King continued, you will learn what humanity calls justice. The Absolute Zero's primary weapon began to charge, and the readings that flooded Coluvian sensors made no sense according to any known physics. The energy signature was that of a collapsing star compressed into a space the size of a city. Block, Supreme, Hierarch Vorth Kane found her voice through a haze of species-deep terror. Admiral Kane, we demand to negotiate. The Galactic Council, Kane interrupted. Legitimized genocide. They called the murder of children a legal response to treaty violations by their own laws. What I'm about to do is equally justified. Wait. General Krexzul's voice cracked across the communication array. Our planetary defenses are still operational. The orbital biofortresses, the atmospheric processors, we can defend ourselves. As if summoned by his words, Mantis Prime's defenses came online. Hundreds of biomechanical weapon platforms emerged from their hidden positions in the planet's ring system, their organic hulls bristling with weapons that had held back a dozen different invasion fleets. The atmospheric processors, massive organisms that converted the planet's air into a weaponized medium, began releasing spores that could dissolve metal and flesh with equal efficiency. The planet's surface itself became a weapon as the great hives extended their defensive tendrils into space. Living weapons that could reach orbital altitude and drag enemy ships down into the crushing depths of the world's biomechanical digestive systems. For a moment, it seemed as though Mantis Prime might actually be able to defend itself. Then the human fleet demonstrated why they had been so confident in their approach. Captain Elena Voidwalker commanded the destroyer TFNS Entropy, activated her ship's new weapon system. What emerged from the destroyer's hull wasn't a projectile or energy beam, it was a patch of space where the laws of physics simply stopped working. Matter within the affected area began to spontaneously decay, releasing energy in patterns that followed no known mathematical model. The Biofortress Living Shield was caught in the entropy field's embrace. Its massive form, evolved over millennia to resist conventional weapons, began to unravel at the molecular level. In 30 seconds, a structure the size of a small moon became a cloud of component atoms drifting in the solar wind. Entropy weapons. Krexzul breathed. They're weaponizing the heat death of the universe. But even as their defenses crumbled, the Coluvians fought with the desperate fury of a species facing extinction. The atmospheric processors released everything they had: viral spores that could eat through any known material, nanoorganisms that could reprogram enemy technology, psychic parasites that could drive organic minds to madness. The human fleet's response was brutal in its elegance. The frigate TFNS Cleansing Fire deployed a weapon that Admiral Kane had personally designed, a field generator that created zones of absolute sterility where no biological process could function. The Coluvian bioweapons simply died as they entered the field, their cellular structures unable to maintain cohesion in an environment where life itself was forbidden. One by one, Mantis Prime's defenses fell silent. Supreme Hierarch Vorth Kane, watching her civilization's death from the depths of the Grand Hive, made a decision that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. She activated the planetary communication ray and broadcast on all frequencies simultaneously. Admiral Kane, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of Coluvian pride, I offer the surrender of our world. Spare our people, and the Coluvian hegemony will withdraw from all disputed territories and pay whatever reparations you demand. For a long moment, silence filled the space between worlds. Then Kane's response came, carrying with it the cold finality of entropy itself. Supreme Hierarch, she said, when your forces burned New Sydney, Did they accept the surrender of our civilians? Will your bioplasma turn our children to ash? Did you show mercy to the innocent? The Absolute Zero's primary weapon reached full charge, its energy readings spiky beyond measurement. On Mantis Prime's surface, sensitive bioorganisms began to die simply from proximity to the gravitational distortions the weapon was creating. Please, Vorthkane whispered, her proud carapace trembling with fear she had never imagined possible. Our young, they are innocent of their parents' crimes, so were ours, Kane replied. But that didn't save them from your justice. The weapon fired. What struck Mantis Prime wasn't a beam or projectile, it was a localized reversal of entropy itself. The planet's surface began to reorganize at the molecular level, its carefully maintained bioarchitecture dissolving as the fundamental forces that held matter together were systematically reversed. But then, something unprecedented happened. The weapon stopped. On the bridge of the Absolute Zero, Captain Marcus Stellarwind looked at his admiral with confusion. Ma'am, the weapon's charging cycle was interrupted. We're receiving a priority transmission. Kane's expression didn't change. From whom? From Earth. Ma'am, it's marked with presidential override codes. The view screen flickered, revealing the face of President Jonna Clearwater, humanity's elected leader and the woman who had authorized the fleet's construction. Her expression was grim, but determined. Admiral Kane, she said, I'm ordering you to stand down. The weapon is not to be fired. Ma'am, Kane replied, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. The Coluvians murdered our people. Justice demands. Justice, Clearwater interrupted, doesn't require us to become the monsters we're fighting. Hold your position. Admiral, we're going to show the galaxy what human mercy looks like and why it's more terrifying than our weapons. The turning point had arrived, but not in the way anyone had expected. 6 months after the fleet above Mantis Prime stood down from firing the entropy weapon, the galaxy had learned to fear something far more dangerous than human military technology. Human mercy. The Terran rehabilitation zone stretched across what had once been the Coluvian hegemony. Like a vast web of humanitarian occupation, human medical ships moved between devastated worlds, their crews working alongside Coluvian survivors to rebuild what the war had destroyed. But this was not the charity of victors, it was the calculated compassion of a species that understood the strategic value of gratitude. Admiral Vera Kane stood in the observation deck of the orbital station New Sydney Memorial, watching the reconstruction efforts on Mantis Prime's surface. The planet's bioarchitecture was slowly healing under human guidance, but the new structures bore subtle differences that only a trained military eye could spot. Every rebuilt hive was now dependent on human-supplied materials. Every atmospheric processor required human oversight to function. Every defensive installation had been redesigned with human-controlled kill switches. The Coluvians don't realize they're in a cage, observed Dr. Rebecca Soulforge, the xenobiologist overseeing the rehabilitation program. They think we're helping them rebuild their civilization. We are helping them, Kane replied, though her smile was sharp as winter ice. We're helping them rebuild it exactly the way we want it. The strategic brilliance of President Clearwater's mercy gamut had become apparent within weeks of its implementation. Rather than creating martyrs through genocide, humanity had created something far more valuable, a dependent client state, whose every breath required human permission. The door to the observation deck slid open, admitting Ambassador General Harrison, Wright Bain, humanity's new representative to what remained of the Galactic Council. His expression carried the satisfaction of a man who had just concluded a very profitable negotiation. The Saurian Confederation has agreed to our terms, he reported. Full recognition of human territorial claims, technology sharing agreements, and most importantly, they've agreed to reform the Galactic Council's legal framework to include human concepts of civilian protection. And if they refuse to implement the reforms, Kane asked, then they'll find themselves facing the same rehabilitation program that the Coluvians are enjoying. Wright Bain replied, amazing how quickly species can discover humanitarian concerns when the alternative is having their entire civilization restructured by well-meaning human relief workers. On Mantis Prime's surface, Supreme Hierarch Vorthkane, now bearing the human-imposed title of Provincial Administrator, stood in her rebuilt throne chamber, surrounded by advisors whose every word was monitored by human surveillance systems. The bioluminescent implants that had once marked her absolute authority had been replaced with human-manufactured devices that could be remotely deactivated if she displayed concerning behavioral patterns. The humans claim they're here to help us rebuild, she said to her most trusted aide, General Krexzul, who now served as liaison between the Coluvian government and their human overseers. But every day, we become more dependent on their technology, their materials, their approval. What choice do we have? Krexzul replied, his mandibles clicking with barely suppressed frustration. Resistance would mean extinction. At least this way, our people survive. Neither of them mentioned that their conversation was being recorded by human monitoring systems, or that their continued survival depended on maintaining the fiction that they were grateful for human assistance. Across the galaxy, the transformation continued with inexorable efficiency. The Valen Collective found their ethereal cities being rebuilt with human-designed systems that required constant maintenance from Earth-based contractors. The Gorathans discovered that their industrial complexes had been upgraded with human technology that made them dependent on Terran supply chains. The Cetaceans learned that their vast underwater cities now relied on human-manufactured atmospheric processors. Every species that had supported the Coluvian interpretation of the Terran Accords now found themselves in golden cages of their own, their civilizations restructured to ensure that opposition to human interests would be literally impossible. But the most profound change was in the Galactic Council itself, the crystalline chamber where the galaxy's powers had once legitimized. Genocide now bore a new addition, a memorial wall listing the names of every civilian killed in conflicts, deemed legally justified by council decision. At its center, carved in stone that came from the ruins of New Sydney, were the names of 23 million human children. Councillor Vorth, the amphibian bureaucrat who had once dismissed human suffering as legally irrelevant, now found himself reading those names aloud at the beginning of every council session. It was a human requirement, implemented as part of the legal reform process that humanity had insisted upon, as a condition of their continued participation in galactic civilization. The council recognizes the civilian casualties of New Sydney, Vorth recited, his voice hollow with the weight of enforced penance. We acknowledge that our legal framework enabled the targeting of non-combatants, and we commit to ensuring that such tragedies never occur again. Ambassador General Brightbane listened to the recitation from his place at the newly constructed human delegation platform, a structure that deliberately towered over every other representative's position in the chamber. When Vorth finished the ritual acknowledgement, Brightbane rose to address the assembly. Honored delegates, he began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics. Humanity wishes to propose new legislation regarding the protection of civilian populations during military conflicts. The proposal that followed was comprehensive, binding, and enforced by the implicit threat of human intervention. Any species that targeted civilian populations would find themselves facing not just military retaliation, but comprehensive humanitarian reconstruction of their entire civilization. The vote was unanimous. Opposition was no longer a viable option. 5 years after the Battle of Kepler 442, Admiral Kane found herself back on Earth, standing in the cemetery where the victims of New Sydney had been memorialized. The graves were symbolic. There had been no bodies to bury after the Coluvian bioplasma bombardment, but the memorial served its purpose as a reminder of what humanity had lost and what they had gained in response. President Clearwater joined her among the grave markers, her expression reflecting the weight of decisions that had reshaped galactic civilization. Any regrets? Clearwater asked. Kane considered the question carefully. Above them, the stars shone with the light of a galaxy where civilian populations were now protected by laws enforced by human military might, where species that had once celebrated genocide now competed to demonstrate their humanitarian credentials, where the phrase legally justified could no longer be used to legitimize the murder of children. None, she said finally. We showed them what human mercy looks like. We proved that our compassion is more dangerous than our weapons, because it makes resistance impossible rather than suicidal. The Coluvians will never be truly free again, Clearwater observed. Neither will any species that supports targeting civilians, Kane replied. We've created a galaxy where our enemies survive to serve as examples of what happens when humanity decides to rebuild a civilization according to our specifications. It's more effective than any weapon we could have deployed. As they walked among the memorial stones, a message arrived from the edge of human space. Another species, the crystalline hierarchies of the Andromeda Reach, had been discovered targeting civilian populations in their expansion campaigns. They had been contacted by human diplomats and offered a choice: reform their military doctrines voluntarily, or receive humanitarian assistance in restructuring their civilization. The message concluded with a request for Admiral Kane's presence. At the negotiations, she smiled as she read the report. The galaxy was learning, slowly but surely, that there were fates worse than death, and humanity was very good at providing them to any species that threatened innocent lives. The treaty had been clear, but Earth's revenge had been clearer still, not through destruction, but through the patient application of mercy that was indistinguishable from conquest. In the end, that had proven to be humanity's greatest weapon, the ability to save their enemies from themselves, whether those enemies wanted salvation or not. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what humanity had intended.